Hello, good day, and this is Sharon Banwell of Informed Wellness, and today we're going to talk about a topic that has been a very trending topic since I made a post. It is about menopause and perimenopause and the different phases that women go through during menopause. So to break down the information, I'm actually going to present it in a live for you so you can understand the science behind what is happening. So just a disclaimer, this is not a medical diagnosis. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm simply explaining information. If any of this information makes sense to you and you wish to follow up with a checkup, I know Dr. Davy at Better Health Clinic in Arnesville is very good at doing these sort of assessments if you do not already have your regular OBGYN. And she can get the ball rolling with the numerous tests that are needed that will test to see where you are on the scale, if in the event that any of the information that I present here to you makes sense. So today we're going to talk about your body and your hormones. So a woman will experience her first period in her prepubescent or pubescent ages, and this would last 40 years. So a woman will go through her cycle for 40 years. When a woman is going through her cycle, she will experience 4 phases during that cycle. So each month, a woman experiences 4 different phases in her cycle. This represents the different changes that is happening in the uterus, but it is not isolated to the uterus. So do not think that menstruation is simply just something that happens in your lower region. Menstruation is something that affects your entire body as a woman because it is guided by hormones. So during these different phases, you will have the follicular phase, the luteal phase, the ovulation phase, and the menstrual phase. At each phase, your hormones will rise and fall accordingly. So the hormone that is most prevalent in the follicular stage would be estradiol. Now, estradiol is also present in men. Testosterone is converted into estradiol as they interact with fat tissue. Estradiol is like your estrogen and progesterone and your testosterone being leveled off, and that's why we have estradiol. So here we have a balance in your hormones. When we get to the luteal phase, your body will start releasing what is called FSH and LH, which is your follicular stimulating hormone and your luteinizing hormone. So we will see a spike really in estrogen right here, right? So I'll use O or E because estrogen can begin with both. As we experience estrogen and you get the thickening of your lining, then we will have progesterone. Now, the thickening of the lining is facilitated by estrogen because estrogen is a building hormone. So we have hormones that metabolize, and we have a build-up and growth, which we call anabolic, and then we have hormones that break down. So they break down things, and we call those catabolic. So your catabolic hormone would be the progesterone, would be estrogen, and your hormone that keeps that thickening of your lining there would be progesterone, which would be in your ovulatory state. So after your estrogen has thickened the lining, ovulation will come along, release the egg, keep it nice and thick and ripe with progesterone, and then after there is no fertilization of the egg, you will find a decline in progesterone, and then you will find a rise in estrogen again, which is going to help to break down this as you are breaking down, you will find that there's a rise in your hormones there again with estrogen. After your menstrual cycle, you will then find the balance of estradiol coming back, right? So at each different stage in your period, you would experience different symptoms. So when you're during the follicular stage, you will have a lot of energy, you will feel strong, you will feel independent, you will get a good rest, you will feel well rested, you will feel comfortable in your body. But soon after that, you start experience this, right? Which is in the luteal phase, you start experiencing nausea, you may feel a little bit more tired. And as it progresses and progesterone gets higher and higher, remember progesterone keeps that building up. So whereas estrogen was building up here, progesterone is going to keep that buildup. So you'd usually find inflammation being very prevalent during this time because your body is in a state of building and keeping that. So if you have inflammation in your gut, you would usually find that you become bloated at that time. One of the common symptoms that we look for to see how close we are to our ovulation is we would usually feel our breasts, and our breasts would usually feel very swollen. Our nipples will feel very tender. All of this is happening throughout our body. So our brain may experience swelling as well, especially if we have a lot of inflammatory tissue. Our joints may hurt, our back may hurt. We just experience a lot of symptoms because if you think of inflammation, for example, if I were to hit you and you get inflammation in the area that was damaged, there will be swelling and redness and fever, etc. in the general area and tenderness. That's what inflammation is. So because these hormones interact with those inflammatory cells, and I will explain why, you will realize that as you go through your ovulation, changes in your body that you assume are just because of your period may become exacerbated. So that bloating feeling that is in your gut is because your gut is already inflamed, and the hormone that is meant to further inflame and keep things in a very rich blood oxygenated state would eventually just swell as well. It will not be isolated to just your uterus, and I will explain why. And then as you have your period and you're releasing, you may find you feel weak, you may find that your body is not at its best, etc. Now, just to note, progesterone is the hormone that actually keeps babies in the belly, right? So if you have an estrogen dominance, which we'll talk about, you may experience a lot of miscarriages. That's because the progesterone is not getting high enough to keep you in that rich, full, thickened, ripened state, for lack of a better word. So this is the regular cycle of the woman throughout the month. But then when we look on a larger scale, you'll realize that a woman experiences this cycle for 40 years. And this is broken down into 10-year periods, right? Because it is not a situation where you wake up one day and you're ovulating and the next day you're menstruating. As you can see, this happens over the 4-week period. So as this happens over the 4-week period, our body is gradually experiencing these highs and lows. So too is with your 40-year cycle, which we will call basically childbearing age, right? So childbearing age, or the fertile stage of a woman, would last 40 years. So the first stage would be puberty. So for that 10 years, if you experience your first period at 9, per se, for those first 10 years, your body will try to regulate to a balance. So as you're trying to regulate to a balance, by the time you're 19, if you experience your first period at 9, by the time you're 19, your period should regulate. You should know what your cycle is like. You should know whether you experience a 28-day cycle, a 26-day cycle, you experience a 31-day cycle. It varies for women. That is very normal. And you would also know the average length it takes for your body to completely shred its endometrial lining. So you should be able, at let's say 20 years old, to understand what your body is experiencing. So between 19 and 29 now, you would find that this would be the peak in your hormones. So this would be the peak in your hormones because your hormones have regulated. You are ripe and ready for childbearing, right? However, within that 10-year period, your body is still experiencing changes, and how you live and what you do affects how those changes, how rapidly those changes are happening. So within the next 10-year cycle, which brings you up to 29, you will start experiencing, or you will start the onset of what is called perimenopause. Now, peri simply means before, and menopause. So perimenopause is when your body starts exhibiting symptoms that your hormones are now changing. And the same way your estrogen was highest at this point, you will start to feel a drop in your estrogen levels and a drop in your progesterone levels. Now remember, I said progesterone is what keeps you ripe and ready. Estrogen is what builds up. Now, this brings us to lifestyle. Many women who are around this age, 30 to 40, because many women experience their period around the same time, they're going to start experiencing perimenopausal symptoms, which when you add perimenopausal symptoms with metabolic disorders, that is when you start experiencing hormonal issues, serious, severe hormonal issues. And I know many women are talking about PCOS and endometriosis, and there are lots of other uterine issues that come with metabolic disorder, in addition to your diabetes and hypertension and cardiovascular issues, high cholesterol, etc. All of these are metabolic disorders because your immune system, your internal immune system, which is supposed to regulate those hormones, are off. And because those hormones are dysregulated, it is sending an excess and it is sending not enough to certain receptors. Now, when we're talking about receptors, all of these hormones have receptors in the body, right? And much like estrogen is a building hormone, insulin is also a building hormone. So if you have an excess in a building hormone, other building hormones will naturally become dominant. If you have a deficiency in those catabolic hormones, you will also experience a deficiency in other catabolic hormones, right? So for example, leptin, which is a hormone that helps to break down, you would experience a deficiency in those because the receptors for those will die. The same way insulin receptors will grow when you have an excess of insulin, etc. Or you will have insulin receptors being killed and your body producing excess insulin so those receptors can have something because they're dying off. So when you start eating high starch diets, lots of sugary foods, fiberless foods, and when I say fiberless foods, these are foods that are packaged because the fiber is really what makes the food spoil. So when you have high starch diet, high sugar diet, fiberless foods, you don't sleep well, you're very stressed out. Now, all of these are triggers of hormones. So high starch foods and sugar foods will trigger your insulin. Fiberless foods will trigger your ghrelin and reduce your leptin. And lack of sleep and so will increase your cortisol. So all of these lifestyle habits, when you don't exercise, especially if you don't do cardiovascular and you don't lift weights, this will also trigger hormone because progesterone and testosterone really thrives when you are doing cardiovascular, and testosterone will thrive when you're doing weightlifting because it is stored mainly in your muscles and bones. So in your muscles and bones, you will find your storage of your progesterone. Your cardiovascular is very good for, getting those insulin receptors very sensitive and building up your leptin receptors. Your sleep obviously is dopamine and your serotonin and so on. And those affect your hormones as well. Fiber affects your gut health, which affects your entire immune system. So your entire immune system is going to be based on your gut. And most of your progesterone is made in the gut. So your progesterone is made in the gut. And you need a specific vitamin, which is your vitamin Bs, which relies on something called intrinsic factor. So if you do not consume fiber, your gut will not be well. You will not have this enzyme called intrinsic factor, and therefore you cannot absorb vitamin B. So therefore you will suffer from progesterone deficiency, and progesterone deficiency will eventually lead to estrogen dominance. All of that to say, in your entire body, you have these what you call extragonadal receptor sites. The extragonadal receptor sites mean in your gonads, for a woman, which is your ovaries, for a man is your testes, that produce life cells, the cells that make babies and so on. So in your gonads, women produce estrogen in their ovaries and their placenta. So there are 3 types of estrogen that a woman will have. In her childbearing age, she will have estradiol. During pregnancy, she will have, what's this one called? Let me see, I forgot what it's called. Estriol. Yeah, estriol. And then when she reaches menopause, the hormone that will be dominant by then would be estrogen. So estrogen, you notice estrogen sounds like testosterone, progesterone, and estrogen together. Estriol, that's what keeps the baby there. That's a type of estrogen that will not break down or will not affect the child, but will feed the child and feed the woman the right amount of estrogen and those good hormones. And estradiol is what you go through monthly, right? Now, there's a lot of studies that show this type of estrogen, estriol, actually helps a woman go through the phases of menopause and postmenopause very easily. And I don't want to suggest that you go and get pregnant, but I just want to tell you that a woman who has been gestating for at least 6 months, so even if you were pregnant once and you miscarried, but you carried that child for 6 months, it drastically reduces your menopausal symptoms and your early onset of menopause, which would be your perimenopause. It will delay your perimenopause if you just gestate for 6 months. However, if you breastfeed for 7 to 12 months, then it reduces your effects even further. And some suggest that you may not even experience a severe menopause just by breastfeeding. Now, this does not happen if you have more children. So if you have 4 or 5 children, it doesn't matter. The mere fact that you were pregnant one for 6 months, it decreases your symptoms, and breastfeeding for 7 to 12 months will decrease it even further. So that's just some information that you need to know there. But outside of the gonads, which is the ovaries and the placenta, if you're not pregnant, you won't have a placenta, but everybody will have ovaries. So those are your gonads. We are so accustomed associating uterine issues and hormonal issues together that we forget that hormones affect your entire body. So there are receptor sites outside of your reproductive organs that actually need these hormones, and these receptor sites are called extragonadal receptor sites. So they're your adipose tissue, which is fat. That is why when you have a high BMI, you are expected to have estrogen dominance, because fat produces estrogen and stores estrogen along with your ovaries. Other sites are your liver, your kidney, your lungs, your heart, your breast, and your pineal glands. So if we look at this, your liver and your kidney, which you call your peritoneum area, your lungs and your heart, which is your mediastinum area, and then your pineal gland, which is your cranial area. All of those areas you will realize experience symptoms when you are going through PCOS. So for your liver, you may get fatty liver disease and insulin resistance. Your kidney, you may experience UTIs and other kidney infections like pyelonephritis. You may experience problems in your lungs. Many of you experience sleep apnea, where you may wake up in the middle of the night and you feel like you can't catch your breath. Or you may have sinus issues, so you always have a cough, or you always have some inflammation in your lungs, in your sinuses. You're always, that feeling because of the eye, nose, and throat and lungs connection. In your heart, you may get cardiovascular disease, hypertension. In your breast, some people develop breast cancer. So tumors are also one of the symptoms of those extragonadal receptor sites over metabolizing estrogen, and breast cancer, uterine cancer, all of these cancers. So especially in this eye, nose, throat area, your thyroid gland is also here. And then you may experience things like temporal arthritis, extreme migraines, poor sleep, depression, fogginess, frustration and stress with your pineal gland, because your pineal gland regulates your sleep cycles with melatonin and serotonin, and it also helps to regulate your brain temperature, your body temperature, everything. Now, we call these midline receptor sites, and if you are into Ayurveda lifestyle or whatever, you'd realize these midline receptor sites are actually your chakras. So that is why meditation helps with your PCOS. because you're regulating your pineal gland, you're regulating your brain, and you're helping your body to metabolize that estrogen that is being stored and becoming toxic in your brain, in your lungs and your breast. That's why we do breath work, right? So we're giving the exercise to our lungs and we're ridding the inflammation. So think of having a swollen arm, and in order to alleviate some of the pain in that swollen arm, you will give it a massage. So our breath work is very important to get some of that excess estrogen from in our heart and from in our lungs and in our chest, our cranial, our chest area, our rib cage, etc. Our heart, that is why we exercise, and we don't exercise rigorously because that's gonna spike. So that's why I suggest walking a lot, because walking, it is medium, but it is prolonged. So our heart gets that pumping. So our entire cardiovascular system, and as well as our muscles, get that necessary massage that is needed to rid itself of inflammation, because the inflammation, those inflammatory cells are feeding off of estrogen, and that is what is causing cancers in the body, right? In the liver and kidney, this is why we fast. We are fasting because we're giving the liver and kidney time to rid itself of toxins, because every time we eat, we are ingesting toxins into our body. So as we give our liver and kidney time to process the toxins that are there, our body can eliminate the excess estrogen. When it comes to adipose tissue, this is why we lower our BMI. Right? So it doesn't matter how many hormone replacements you take. It does not matter how much smoothies or specific herbs and supplements you take. If you are fat, your body is going to simply just store the extra estrogen in your fat, and the fat is going to create excess estrogen, and it's really going to just not respond as effectively to the treatment that you're giving it when you have extra adipose tissue. One of the ways that we lower adipose tissue is by getting our gut in order. So this is why we eat a lot of fibrous foods. This is why we drink teas that are rich in democulants that help to rebuild our gut lining. And this is why we ensure that the food that we're eating is nutritious, so we can get all of the vitamins that is going to feed our body the nutrients that it needs without having to run on sugar and calories, because that's all we're doing when we consume a lot of starch. We're running our body on sugar and calories, which obviously is going to spike our insulin, which is going to spike our estrogen, and we're already in an estrogen dominant state. So these estrogenol receptor sites, sometimes they get tumors, or sometimes they manifest in inflammatory diseases like thyroiditis, endometriosis. Anything with osis is just inflammation. Basically pus, swollen tissue, inflamed tissue, raw sensitive tissue. So think of the external visual of inflammation, and then imagine that happening in your gut. So I was explaining to some teachers at a function that I did the other day, speaking on nutrition. They wanted to know about digestion and so on, and I keep saying the reason why we need to fast and stop eating so much is that our gut is already inflamed, and many of us, because of poor gut health, our pH in our stomach is low. So our body does not digest things as effectively as it is. But your body needs to digest your foods small enough so that it can pass through your small intestines. And if your small intestines is inflamed, then the space between where your food needs to pass is going to be very small. So imagine this is your average size and it is inflamed. The excess skin is going to bring that to this. So that food is going to stay in your stomach until it is liquefied enough to pass through this small opening. Now, when you add hormones on top of that, when you're going through the phases where your body is in that ripened stage, where it's in that swollen ripened stage, that lining that is already inflamed and reduced is going to reduce even further. So that is why we experience symptoms like bloating and constipation at certain times in our period, because our intestines are so inflamed, the food literally cannot pass. And because the food cannot pass, it gets stuck in between the little hairs between it. And then we eventually get things like diverticulitis, GERD, IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome, celiac disease, etc., etc. Compound that with eating starches that are laden with preservatives, and not only preservatives but fertilizers and other farm products that are already toxic to the body, then you're creating inflammation on top of inflammation, and those inflammatory cells feed on estrogen. Okay? So when we're looking at progesterone deficiency, you're going to expect estrogen dominance. And the estrogen dominance is going to eventually lead to testosterone deficiency. Why do we need testosterone? Well, testosterone is necessary for our body to function in different ways. It helps us to keep our bone density, which is why we lift weights, because when we lift weights, our testosterone can be stored in the bone and the muscle, and it will help us not to go through osteoporosis and those things. And it will also help to regulate our ability to handle stress, etc. So this is why we lift weights, because we need the bone density and we need the testosterone from having that bone density. We need the muscles, because the muscles is going to help keep those good hormones that we need, so that it can fight off the excess estrogen, or rather just metabolize the excess estrogen. Okay, now what are some of the things that contribute to testosterone deficiency? Adrenal fatigue, aka stress, right? So adrenal fatigue is caused by excess stress or problems with your kidneys, right? So there we see the connection with kidney health, adrenal fatigue. Once you have adrenal fatigue, you're going to experience high cortisol. I have spoken about how cortisol affects your body to digest and metabolize food, because cortisol basically shuts down your digestive process. So imagine having a low pH, inflamed gut, and then you add high cortisol on top of that, where your body has even slowed this process even further. This is the reason why sometimes it takes people up to 72 hours, 3 days to metabolize one meal. I'll repeat that, because adrenal fatigue is caused by low testosterone, and low testosterone is caused by adrenal fatigue. Adrenal fatigue is caused by low testosterone. It works like that. If you already have a low pH, as in you're genetically predisposed to having a low stomach pH. Some people have high, some people have low. There are foods and things you can eat to increase the pH. So the low pH means that the food is not breaking down as fast. And then you add an inflamed gut, where the hole that the food has to pass through is extra small. Then you add hormones on top of that is going to swell that even further and make it even smaller. And then you add cortisol on top of that is going to slow down that entire process. This is why sometimes we start a diet, and after 3 days, we cannot continue the diet, because our body is now regulating, experiencing the effects of that diet. So you fast, you start fasting, I feel good first day, second day, third day. By the third day, I am experiencing so many symptoms, and I just think my sugar is low and I need to go and eat bread or drink a red juicy because I feel like I'm going to die. What you're really experiencing is that your body is actually now responding to your hormonal changes after 3 days. So think about this. It takes about 3 days for your body to start experiencing changes. And then you can reverse all of this with one meal. You just drink a juicy and you reverse all of the effects with that one juicy. Why? Your body is already inflamed. Your body is already in a state of shock. It's going to take more to bring down those high levels than it is going to take to raise those low levels. So if you give your body 3 days, and I have seen it with diabetics, right? So diabetics, their sugar will be anywhere between 13 and 10, which is almost at the point where they may experience a coma. And you start them fasting, and the sugar drops from 10 to maybe 7. and they'll start shaking and sweating and urinating excessively, and they think their sugar is extremely low because they're experiencing symptoms of low sugar. But their sugar is not even at the normal 4.5 to 5 as yet. It is still very high at 7 and 8. But because the symptoms of low sugar is simply low sugar, if your body was operating at 13, naturally it's going to send a signal when it is 7, because this now would be recorded as a low in your body. So for me, I always have low blood pressure. My blood pressure is always low. Genetically, I think I have big veins, or I think I have a lot of muscle. I work out a lot. I eat differently. So usually when I go to the doctor, my blood pressure is very low. Pregnancy is something that lowers your blood pressure even more. So for somebody like me whose blood pressure is usually like 100/70, when I go to the doctor and I'm pregnant, you would see anywhere between 60/40. And this causes fainting and headaches and so on. So my regular is already low. So when it is low, it is extremely low. So if your regular is high, let's say you're functioning with your blood sugar levels always at a 9 and a 10. And I have seen this in women who are insulin resistant. After their meals, their sugar will spike anywhere up to 10. If you're accustomed functioning with a blood sugar at 10, naturally, after your body is going through the process of limiting that sugar, it is, by the time it reaches 7, you're going to start experiencing symptoms as if your sugar is extremely low. However, biologically, unless you have type 1 diabetes where your body literally cannot produce insulin and you need that insulin to give you that spike. And a normal human being who is suffering from a metabolic disorder, you will never experience a sugar low that will make you faint. You will never, unless you have starved your body and you have no body fat, it's not going to happen. What you will experience, however, is vitamin deficiency, because now your body has no sugar to run on. And because you're not eating a nutrient-dense diet, there are no nutrients, there are no vitamins to feed your body. And most times, even if you start eating a salad within those 3 days, your body has not regulated to create enzymes. Much like the intrinsic factor, it has not regulated to create these enzymes for you to even extract the vitamins out of that food. So you're basically eating food and hardly getting the vitamins because your body is not in a conditioned state to create enzymes to break down that. Okay, so that's essentially like washing the dishes with water alone. You wash dishes with water alone, all the grease and everything, the odor from the foods are going to stay on the dishes because there is no enzyme, there is no agent in there to break down those oils and fats and so on. Same way, if you're not accustomed creating certain enzymes because your body is so accustomed to eating high starch foods, sugary foods, etc., your body is not going to just automatically start creating those things. It will take your body 4 days, a total of 4 days, for that cell tissue to die and recreate itself, where it is sensitive enough to actually start producing these enzymes. So that is why most times by day 3, you can't continue the diet because your body is now starting to experience the changes. And if you continue, at least by day 4, your body will start producing the enzymes. So let's say in 3 more days from day 4, you will have day 7. By day 7, you feel like a brand new person. You'd realize, if I hold out until the 7 days, I feel better after the 7 days. The fasting is not as terrible. The headaches are less. I have more energy, etc., etc. And the longer you continue, up to 21 days, you'll be able to see marked results in even the size of your fibroids will start to shrink. Your period may even regulate. It may not bleed as heavily, or it may not be as painful. So the issue is working against time. We have been damaging our body throughout our years, and we expect that in 2 days, if we drink a tea or supplement, that we're going to change all of these things. right? This is why with the adrenal fatigue and the cortisol, I suggest lifestyle changes that lower stress. I suggest meditation because that is going to decalcify your pineal gland, which is going to actually help you to start releasing melatonin so that you can regulate your sleep cycle. When you sleep, you rid your body of toxins, then all of your other hormones like dopamine and serotonin will then be released at the levels that you want, and you won't need those fake dopamine spikes that we get through sugar or watching TV or gossiping or whatever you get your dopamine from, right? All of these things will worsen between the ages of 29 and 39 during your perimenopausal symptom, compounded by metabolic disorders like PCOS, etc. Now, when you get to menopause, if this is not corrected, this is where we're going to see spikes in things like cancers. Because now these cells have been feeding for so long, they create tumors. Some of these tumors are benign, right? So some of these tumors are just things filled with things like hair and teeth and eyes and so on. You may get them in your breast, you get them sometimes on your pancreas, in your gut, on your liver. You know, they're just tumors, and obviously things growing inside of you, feeding off of you, is going to be uncomfortable, but sometimes they're benign. Sometimes, however, they can become cancerous. So you will experience that around this age. And the studies are showing that women are even experiencing these stages even earlier. I don't know if it's because they're experiencing their periods earlier, or all of these issues are just being compounded even more than they used to long ago. And you know, toxins and all of that in the food. So during your menopausal years now, this is when you're going to be experiencing your worst, because now you're basically operating on about 3% of your eggs, which is going to lower your hormone to about 10% production. So from hair to hair, a woman is now functioning on 3% of her eggs and 10% of the hormones that she would have produced when she first started her first period. And this hormone now is going to compound all the deficiencies, and it's going to compound all of the dominances. And this is going to be bad for you. So when you get to your postmenopausal symptom, you get to postmenopausal age, which will be 50 plus if you had your period at 9, you will have estrone. This estrone levels out. So much like a child growing up, their hormones will level before they started puberty. You will revert to that pre-hormonal stage, but it's not that you will not have certain hormones, it's just that your estrone levels will balance. So if you go through a bad menopause and you have a bad balance of estrone, just know you're going to have that for the rest of your life, right? So some women, you know, they get very erratic mentally when it comes to menopause. Some of them, their mental health is not good. They experience negative symptoms and so on within their body. Some of them may even choose to do a hysterectomy because they just want to find a way to balance that. They take out their ovaries and the uterus and they just supplement with hormones at the specific level because it might be easier. You don't want to do that because then those hormones are not real. Your body does not metabolize synthetic hormones as easily. So you need to make sure that you have one, when you start puberty, and this is for mothers of daughters, please make sure that from the moment, it really should start before puberty so that your child can develop certain eating habits, certain textures, certain tastes. But if you are already at a stage where your child is going through puberty or entering puberty, I suggest that you start practicing the things that are going to mediate these issues, right? And that is making sure that you have a high fiber diet, because fiber is what is going to feed your gut. How does fiber feed your gut? Fiber would be foods that actually have the fiber. So if we were looking at ourselves as a human, if I were to take the blood I were to extract my blood, that would be extracting the fructose out of the fruit, right? Just blood. So fructose is actually the first stage of extracting concentrated juices from fruits that will then be distilled into molasses, which will then be crystallized into sugar. So fructose is just the sugar. The fiber is what has all the cells and all the nice things that we call prebiotics. So the enzymes that live in the fiber and the fiber itself that creates certain enzymes, this is the prebiotic, right? And when you eat these, it goes into your gut and it feeds the gut. And the gut, the same way if we leave an apple out on the table, it will start to rot. It's because those prebiotics are working on the fibers, and that rotting is the probiotic enzymes. So we're gonna have that process inside of us. Many of us can eat fermented foods where the process is already started outside. So if you leave your sorrel to ferment, I know long ago we used to leave our gingerbread and sorrel to ferment. That is a version of kombucha. Kombucha is very good. If you can buy kombucha, go ahead and buy kombucha. Yogurt, but unsweetened yogurt, that has already started fermenting. Cheese, but because of the inflammatory cells and antibiotics in cheese, yes, there's antibiotics in cheese. And you know, antibiotics kills your gut bacteria. So I wouldn't suggest cheese, but if you're the kind of person who own a goat or a cow and you want to make your own cheese, it is healthy, but just not the preserved version in the stores. Things like kimchi, you can make your own kimchi, or you can make pickle salad. Those foods that we ferment, right? Indian foods have a lot of fermented foods because they focus a lot on pickled foods. And pickling foods require that you leave them in a jar to ferment and stale a bit, right? So those probiotics now will then feed our gut, and our gut will create something called postbiotics. One example of a postbiotic will be the intrinsic factor that I said your gut needs in order to break down vitamin D. So like vitamin B, as in boy. So let's say, for example, I have vitamin B deficiency and I go to the store and I buy supplements that are vitamin B. My body will just urinate that vitamin B right out because my body does not have this enzyme called intrinsic factor that helps me to absorb that vitamin B. So that's why when we drink vitamin C, we still get sick, because there are enzymes in the lemons and the citrus and the yellow peppers and all of those fruits that help us to absorb the vitamin C. Without those enzymes, we can't do anything with it. Think of the enzymes as a key that unlocks. So when we eat foods, the food itself is not what is feeding us nutrients. The food is not what is feeding us nutrients. The first thing that must be fed is our gut bacteria. That's what must be fed first and foremost. Our gut bacteria needs to be fed. And our gut bacteria can be good or bad bacteria. So the good bacteria is going to be fed and create those enzymes so that it can unlock the vitamins that we need to absorb. The bad bacteria is simply going to stimulate other toxins in our body, which feeds off of starch. Those bad bacteria feed off of these starchy foods. So therefore, what we get from them is just enzymes that are toxic to the body. That's what causes the inflammation in the gut. So we need prebiotics, which is the fiber, the actual fiber from the food. And then we need to feed the gut bacteria, the good gut bacteria, which would be the probiotics. And then the postbiotics is what we, the human being, actually benefit from. So that is why I attended a health fair, and one of the individuals were trying to tell me that eating a pumpkin muffin is healthy. It's a healthy alternative. And I said, not really. And I broke it down. I said, what are the ingredients of a pumpkin muffin? All of the ingredients of a muffin and pumpkin. So you're adding all the starches and sugars and everything, and then you're just adding pumpkin, assuming that's going to be enough. No, the amount of starch and sugar in that muffin is going to feed the bad bacteria, and the little bit of fiber that you have there to feed the good bacteria, guess what's going to happen? The bad bacteria is going to eat the good bacteria. And if you don't feed that bad bacteria, it's going to start eating you. It's going to start eating your gut lining. And that is why many times when we are hungry, many of us experience symptoms of extreme stomach ache, because that is actually the bad bacteria eating away at our stomach lining. So imagine somebody with a sore foot and you just having a permanent sore foot in your stomach. So as soon as you don't put any starch or anything to sort of be like a plaster over that sore, it just starts hurting because it's inflamed. Okay, so that is why, again, when you have your child, make sure that you start them with a high fiber diet so that you can control the gut. Make sure that they get adequate sleep. A lot of these teenagers, they're on their devices so late, they're not getting enough sleep, and they're starting to experience these symptoms even earlier because they're not getting to regulate their hormones in puberty. Make sure they get enough sleep. Ensure that they do fun activities that are going to de-stress them. And when I say fun activities, play games, let them journal, let them talk, let them chat, let them run around, let them be involved in sports, because again, they're going to need the cardiovascular exercise and they're going to need resistance training to build that muscle mass. And children who develop a certain level of fat tissue in their teen years, those tissues don't go away. So if I develop 50,000 fat cells as a teenager, if I get older, I can increase this to about 80,000, but I will never ever have less than 50,000 fat cells in my body unless I do liposuction or I do some sort of surgery to cut off that skin with those fat cells. Your body does not rid itself of fat cells. That will have to be an intervention like liposuction or freeze therapy or actually cutting off that excess. But I can always increase my fat cells. Right? So as a teenager, it's very important that you have a regulated BMI because you don't want these fat cells producing excess estrogen. And this goes for both males and females because males do produce estrogen. It's estradiol that they produce. And that's why you see young children these days with bubbies, young boys with bubbies. That should not be. They should not have breasts. But because the adipose tissue is producing excess estrogen, it's actually lowering their testosterone. So they end up with smaller penises, breasts, and a tendency to be very moody and very neurotic, as in they're narcissistic. They like to think of themselves, only themselves, and so on. That is how diet affects males. And then there are studies now that actually show that males experience PCOS-like symptoms, and it is very evident with early onset of male pattern baldness. So if you're 20 and you're already experiencing balding, it could be that you are actually experiencing male equivalent PCOS, right? Other than having a high fiber diet, exercising, doing fun things, and getting good sleep, it is also important for them to meditate and journal because you don't want your pineal gland to calcify, because then that's going to cause your inability to regulate your brain temperature, your melatonin and serotonin release. You're going to be demotivated. You're not going to have good critical thinking, the clarity in your thinking, etc. So I would suggest that you lessen the amount of foods that your teenager eats that are not healthy. You encourage them to have fasting periods. So a fasting period could just be don't eat after 6 o'clock. Telling your teenager the fridge and the kitchen is closed after 6 o'clock is good for their health because they get to fast and their liver and kidney gets to purge and all of that. So this is just how I have explained menopause and perimenopause and metabolic disorder and how your PCOS is being made worse because you're probably at your perimenopausal state and you don't know. So the things that you could have done when you were 19, 20, 21, even 25, 27, because I started experiencing my perimenopausal symptoms at 33. Even though I had my first period at 9, I started really experiencing my symptoms at 33. And I attribute the delay to the fact that I had my first child when I was 26. Okay? Well, 27, because that was the year She was born before my birthday. So I attributed the delay in my perimenopausal symptoms to the fact that I breastfed for a year and I had my daughter at 27. But it started anyway at 33. How did it start? The headaches, the alopecia for my PCOS got worse, periods got worse, weight gain was uncontrollable, especially with COVID-19, with the extra stress and the focus on eating non-fibrous foods, because as you know, the supermarkets, we couldn't get into the supermarkets. So I was consuming a lot of preserved foods, like just rice and flours and canned stuff and so on. So I think COVID, not being able to exercise, all of that. So with the COVID-19 and all of the changes that I was experiencing, maybe my body might have been able to endure that 2-3 years before. But because I was already at my perimenopausal state, it caused a lot of issues. This is when I really dived into how I'm going to get my hormones where I was. Because when I did my hormone test, after doing CT scans and all of that, when I finally asked the doctor, could you do a hormone test for me, please? That was when she discovered that my testosterone was basically none. I had no testosterone. My cortisol levels were extremely high. Estrogen levels were extremely high. Progesterone levels were extremely low. From the moment I knew what it was, I found all of the ways. There were no more excuses, right? If I had to fight in the supermarket, I just had to fight in the supermarket. And I was able to regulate and find some semblance. Some of the damage that was already done, right? Like the alopecia and so on, it was already done. But for the most part, I live a fairly comfortable life now. Okay, so you can reverse the effects of this, but it takes time. You can't just pop a pill for 2 days, change your diet for 3 days, and expect that these changes, as you can see, it's a serious changes that your body is going through. And I don't wanna be hard on women, because you know we have this. I'm still young. I see a lot of reels. I saw one the other day with a woman saying, "Oh my gosh, being a grandparent in your 30s, I'm 30 and I'm still a baby." If you want to mentally think about yourself as young, fine, because age is just a number. But in reality, our body is experiencing phases. No matter how childlike a young lady behaves, when she reaches a certain age, she's going to get her period. Whether she's mentally ready for it or not, she is going to get her period. So it's the same with our body as we go through these changes. Yes, you may be 30, you don't think you're ready to have children, you don't think. The reality is at 30, you have already lost about 30% of your eggs, right? You just have about 30%. You just have, sorry, not lost. You've already lost about 70% of your eggs past 35, 36. As you're going into your 40s. So you literally have 30% of the eggs. And by the time you go into that menopausal state, you only have about 3% of your eggs and 10% of the hormones that you need. And that is not even saying that it's gonna show on your external. That's just your body. So yes, you think you're young and everything, and that's why when I tell people at my age, and so they say, but you're still young. Yes, I am still young in the lifespan. I'm still young in my lifespan. So 35 is considered midlife, because if you 70 brings you to 70, half of 70 is 35. So at 35, you're already at your midlife. In your lifespan, yes, you are young. But in the phase of your development, your metabolic development, you just have to take care of business. So the same way a child who is 9 and 10 is still in primary school and not even thinking about sex or boys or anything like that, she's going to experience her period. So too, even though you're in your 30s and you're not ready to hear about menopause or consider that, you know, maybe I should make a child so that I can, you know, regulate, whatever it is. Even though those things are not on your mind, they're in your body and you can't get away from that. So because I'm using the back camera so that the board will be visible, I'm going to see if there are any questions. Okay, so there are no questions. So thank you for joining. And this is the information. Have a good one.